Welcome to the Centurion Response podcast, where we speak with faithful business leaders about their experiences following Jesus at work, at home, and in their communities. Good morning. Today, I am joined by Chris Byers, former CEO and founder, yes?
Not quite founder, but early on.
Okay. And Chris and I have known each other, 2008 maybe earlier than that. So
yeah, it's been a while.
Yep. And we've crossed paths professionally at Stone Soup and Friends weekly gathering, and we have traveled in similar orbits, talking and looking at a lot of the same things, sometimes from different perspectives, because we're moving in different directions sometimes. Would you please do the rest of the rundown on your CV and where you're at today and how things are going?
Yeah. So, where to start? I'll start, my sophomore year in college. We'll just pretend like it didn't matter what happened before then. I ended up at Anderson University in Anderson, Indiana. And that happened through a kind of a confluence of events of people attending, kind of a wealthy donor who loved the school, trying to get seniors to go take a look at the school, et cetera. But it all kind of came together, and I showed up, and two things, other than just great university experience, two great things happened there. One, I met my wife very, very quickly within the first couple of days, and we've been married for 24 years now. And then I also met along the way a guy named Ade Alano. And so he became somebody who has been an important part of my business life. Well, right out of college, he and I started a cell company, and it was custom web-based software. So, in 2000, an e-commerce system would cost you $60,000 to build, and today you can get it for free or pretty close to free. If you needed a content management system, that was a new concept for managing your website, and that was going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we started building custom web-based software like that to serve customers in whatever way they needed. We did that for a handful of years. We actually started with 5 equal partners. Anybody who is here thinking about doing that, that's a terrible idea. 5 equal partners is going to be a failure.
It makes sense when you're 22, right?
That's right. It was a very socialistic, it's all going to be good kind of thing. It did not go so well. So Ade and I were the only two that kind of ran the course. But after a handful of years, we were like, we're paying the interns more money than we're making. We need to move on and do something else. So we did. And then I went on to be a financial advisor, so helping people kind of invest their money. I ended up in healthcare, helping build surgery centers, and I was the person getting all the money for that. So borrowing money, raising money for building, $100 million a year worth of buildings and equipment.
Finding the money. Yes.
Yeah.
I like it better when I'm the person who's getting the money, but I get it. So you were yes.
Fair.
Yep.
Yeah. And so did that for a handful of years. And, along the way, one of the things my wife and I, Dana, were very attracted to were church planting effectively, but church planting, evangelism, growing new, these new startup-esque churches. So we went to a church in Indiana early on in our marriage in Fishers called Northeast. It's actually now part of I-Town if you're in the Indy area. We actually ended up at I-Town many years later for a short while. And one of the things we ended up in Oklahoma City, which is where we moved after we closed that software company down. I landed back in Oklahoma City. We did. And we ended up at a church called Life Church. And the day I walked in the door, I was just kind of blown away by the evangelistic nature of the church. And very much the message is going to drive a lot of people to engage and get to a point somewhere in that kind of 33 minutes of a message or whatever, where they're going to need to make a decision. Like, is this something I need to be, is Jesus something that needs to be a part of my life? Well, Turns out Life Church has been one of the most influential churches now, probably in the world, but definitely in the U.S. And we've gotten to see a lot of that. But we really loved their nature of innovation, trying to reach people in all kinds of different ways. That was church online, really creative use of weekend experiences. And so I'll feed through the CV and we can come back to some of this, but that got us to move to London for a handful of years to be effectively missionaries. And so at the end of that whole experience, we came back and my friend Ade had started another company. And I had helped him kind of raise some money for it. I had been an early user of the product. And he had started then a third company, and he needed to go fund that, raise money, hire people. So he was going to move out to California from Indiana. And I was like, hey, I'll come run what is now Formstack for you for 6 months, and we'll see if we can find a CEO. And about 3 or 4 months in, he was like, hey, would you stay? And I was like, you know what? I'm having a great time. I really like the people here. It was a team of 7 at the time. And so that kind of led into what was 14 years of, the largest work investment of my life, growing a business from 7 to kind of the high of 300 people, and growing a business from, $1 million to well over $70 million. And so that journey had a lot of movements in it over the course of 14 years, a lot of learning, et cetera. But sometime last year, I was like, man, I've had enough of this. It's time for me to move on and do something else. I've thought about these problems over and over and over again for 14 years. I need a break. I need to think about something else in my life. And so we found a new CEO. He came in late last year. And then over the past 8 months or so, I've been somewhere in break mode and then really starting to think about what's next.
So there are a bunch of places to jump in on that. Let's go with sometimes last year I decided to have enough of this, because that's a critical inflection moment in a person's life, in a leader's life. Sometimes the business grows to a point that the business is bigger than the person who's at the wheel is equipped to drive. But sometimes people bring in VC partners and things like that, and the dynamics change, because it seems like a lot of times when VC money is engaged, it can mean it's about climbing forward, but sometimes it's treated like here's the short shoot to the next step. And a lot of times when the VC leaders show up and they put people on the board, they want to move pieces on the chessboard as well. But it also changes the tone of the culture, in my observation. So as soon as you say that was, something changed, what was the confluence or constellation of things that gave you the opportunity to reconsider and find clarity?
Yeah, at least one overarching thing is, one place I've probably always seen myself is as a steward of other people's, money, for the lack of a better way to say it, their investment, so, what I loved about Formstack for the first 8 years, let's say solidly, was Ade was the, majority owner of the business. We had some great board, and it was just kind of a fun adventure together. And I felt like, man, I am stewarding this business that somebody else started and trying to grow it as fast as we can. When in a startup, there's some people who start businesses who are like, I'm going to own this thing forever. I actually know a guy who owns a lot of apartment buildings in Indiana, and he's got a very socially good-minded kind of business thought process. And it's like, I'm going to own these things forever because I want to control the environment that people are living in and make sure it's to my standard and they're getting this like exceptional community experience. Well, when you've got
chaplains on site and stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Ethan Fernhaber. So he's a great, he's got this great vision for that. And that's what you get to do when you are in control. And that was kind of the case with this combination of, although Ade was technically in control, he absolutely let me run things. But then I also knew my work was ultimately benefiting him and some other investors. But that gave us a lot of freedom to build a great culture and to think about the product, very heavily. If we were frustrated about some experience we were creating for our customers, we could go spend time on it, and we kind of be slow.
Well, to your point, I remember kind of the word around the startup community in Indianapolis was that Formstack is just prints money, that it's not a lot of movement on the, you chose to go down kind of a HIPAA path and a highly secure route. But I think the only product I remember you guys testing and it didn't work, I think you called it Casserole, right? And that was
right.
And I don't remember what it did, but I remember thinking this is, I remember thinking it was an example that was contrary to what was normal for Formstack. Formstack was very conservative, and we weren't trying to follow Typeform, for example. And I remember first seeing Typeform and its candy and doodaddery. I'm like, but that, I think I even asked you about it, and you just weren't interested in following that. And it seemed like you chose a path that built in a more steady fashion, and the board members are famous for knowing when to take money off the table, things like that. Is all of that related to stewardship? Is that what it was, that because you were a steward, you could be more conservative and you didn't have to be ambitious in the high risk way? How are those two things, that brand and your perspective, connected?
Yeah. I think it's a good point. Like, I am very, very practical by nature. I am, somebody gets in the room with me and gets in sales mode. And if I start to see us, disassociate, moving away from reality a little bit. And by the way, that can be very effective. People can sell big visions and do some great things. But when I hear it, I'm like, I'm done. I want practice
branding. Yeah, you're leading the receiver. Yep.
Yeah.
Only works with
I'm just like practical choices for practical matters. Like, let's just be straightforward. Let's be very transparent. And so what that meant for us was we just kept looking at, although we had raised $1 million back in 2008, 2009, which is kind of pre my time, for the first 8 years, I was just like, we could go raise $1 million, $10 million, doesn't really matter. But for what? We're just going to dump it into sales and marketing. And I don't think we're necessarily going to grow any faster. The unit economics don't seem like they can work. So let's just kind of keep going. And what was amazing for us, and, looking back, people say great things about Formstack in those first probably 5 years of me being, it was you guys kind of live under the radar. Nobody knows who you are. You're not pushing hard enough. We actually gave a distribution to our investors one time, and I got the weirdest reactions. I got calls that were like, what is happening here? Like, I don't understand. You're giving up. And I was like, we're a business. We produce cash and we have enough and we don't need to use it on something else right now. So we thought, you've been in for 5 years. Why don't we give you some money back? But people just didn't understand the way we operated. But I do think it allowed us, we didn't have the pressure of somebody else's timeline. And we were able to make decisions that we thought were good and practical and the right thing to do. So you then look back at the end of, say, 8 years and like, oh, wow, that $1 million business turned into a $13 million business without anybody else's capital, beyond those early days. And so time actually plays out in your favor if you can just continue to plod along and get a little bit better. If we'd have taken money in those early days, bad things would have happened. I think we would have lost control. There's actually a great book about, it's titled something like To Be Rich or To Be King. And it effectively contrasts, the way to get rich is to take venture capital, take investors' money and grow as fast as possible, but you're going to lose control. the way to be king is you continue to own your business or more of it, and you take it a little bit slower. You don't necessarily take all the money, and yet you get to control things and make sure it's going the way you think it should go for, the decisions and reasons that you care most about. But they're trade-offs. Like it's rare to be able to do both. Of course, some people have pulled it off. Steve Jobs, I'm sure except it turns out Steve Jobs got fired one time and disappeared for 10 or 20 years. It's like, later he got to come back in a different light.
But I mean, in that probably in a more of a rich way. I mean, it was flash and ash. So coming then, if you mix the faith perspective in with the business perspective, is one of those easier? So if a person has the conviction that everybody bears the image of God and that there is an inherent value and worth, and if a person thinks that God's number one agenda in the world is reconciliation between the creator and creation, does one of those models have an inherent advantage over the other?
That's a great question, because I think both can be very acceptable for, because I guess the way I think about how God's in the world, or some of the good we do as entrepreneurs is, and I do think we provide people good cultures. And I think you can do that in both those environments. So they may look a little bit different. One's much more aggressive and, we're out here for a goal that probably financially oriented. One might be a little bit more mission oriented, but I think you can still create great cultures for people. And then, ultimately providing people jobs is a good thing, and helps them grow in their life and, be able to pay for things and buy houses and pay for college and stuff like that. So I think redemption can come in both. Now, what I would say is you are at some point, the more investment you take, the more you are at the whim of those investors. And so we experienced in my last year at Formstack, we had investors who had put a lot of money in the business, and they needed to make sure it was going to, by the way, they have downstream investors. Some of those were pension funds, retiree systems for the state of Texas, for this, these they've got real people behind the scenes that aren't just rich white people that need a return because they're counting on it. So I understand, but they need to get a pretty stated specific return out of their investment. And so they know how to do that a couple ways. Sometimes that's grow. Sometimes that gets super profitable. And so ultimately we had to make a decision, because we had big investors, to reduce our team pretty significantly. And so I think you can create good, but you just get less and less, or you get more and more limitations when you have more investors at the table, because they have stated and unstated outcomes that they're looking for.
It seems like one of the challenging deals for anything we invest our energies into is to understand that some things last forever. You and Dana live forever. Your marriage ends when you die. It's an it.
Right.
And so how we invest in it's, whether it's marriage, relationships, businesses, and the performance of the it is measured by how it encourages the flourishing of the eternal beings that are influenced by it or impacted by it. And so it can be a challenge, I think, to know that a business is an it, and that it has a role to play, and how it influences the flourishing of the people is changed by how the it is managed. And so I think you're saying that either one can work. One might require, I think, that when you play the fast game, you have to make faster decisions, and you also probably have to have a higher tolerance for a different sort of fail rate. And there's a different sort of dispassion that's required in how you steward the it. Am I tracking with what you're saying in a reasonable way?
Yeah, I think so. I think God redemption can play out anywhere. If we believe that God's kingdom is here or near, or, something in that genre, I mean, we can be anywhere in our lives and we can see God work. We can be in jail for sharing our faith. We can be in, just terrible financial straits. And yet that's where we're seeing God like provide for us. So I think God can work in all of those places, but I do love that temporary reminding ourselves that a business is very, very temporary in nature. It has a life cycle, could be short, could be long, but sometimes we get a little bit out of shape thinking about good to great and all these businesses that last forever. And you're like, even those businesses are going to falter at some point, and that needs to be okay. I always, some leaders get frustrated when people quit on them. I was always like, you're here for a journey. Like, if it's your time to go on and do something else, that is fine. Like, I am not your spiritual guide. I am not your life guide. And this is not the best place to work in the world. I'm not one to think that's the case. And so we were glad to have people when we had them. And if it was their time to go, I was never one to sell people on staying, because I was like, that's up to you. Like, if you've made the choice, then go for it. Like, I'm supportive of you, and I'll be a fan from the outside.
Yep. I watched you had a marketing leader take a sabbatical for a while, and I watched that. I was removed enough, but I remember thinking that the role of marketing there would have a different sort of burden and challenge and tension. And what I think I watched was real honor towards the person and how they moved. And I think it facilitated an ongoing, I still assume that he is a strong advocate for the culture he was part of, even after the sabbatical, he moved on, right? Or eventually, I think he came back for a time. But that was an example of what you're saying on that open-handedness. And I think it's a challenge to, again, for me, it's the shorthand of an it. If it's an it, I'm not at stake. I just have to steward the thing. You mentioned you could be in jail for sharing your faith or in financial dire straits. And, I pinged you because I saw a Facebook post from Dana, a little video about a restaurant moment in Fishers. And there have been so many moments where I've been able to relate to that. Would you share that anecdote? And because it's cool that you've had this good exit, and now you get to depressurize and figure out what's next from a position of strength and all that. But it hasn't been just dead dragons all along the trail. So
that's right. Well, yeah. So going all the way back to that software company that I mentioned at the very beginning. So after a handful of years, we were like, you know what, we're not going to make any money at this. And so let's be done. Now, the let's be done did not come with, we had a plan for what was next, or I don't think I even thought about, and I need a job tomorrow, because I've not been paying myself very much money anyway. So I have zero savings. And early on we were doing stupid things like, pretty sure we got our first dog, credit card. We definitely went to Target all the time and bought whatever we felt necessary. And, all that was adding up at the same time. And so,
but you're financially trained, you're finance people. Like, you're
dual finance dual finance major graduates. So we should be geniuses.
So, but you got a dual track in there somewhere. Yeah.
That's right. So we closed, the company was called Bottled Software. We closed it down, and not too long after that, my wife and I, and she had also decided to leave her job at the time. And so we were both kind of, had no income, and I think she was starting something new. And so it hadn't really picked up yet. And we went out one day, we were living in Fishers. We went out one day and we were like, let's go get something to eat. And we had this kind of moment. We were at the Wendy's. We live in Fishers, the Wendy's that you drive by all the time on 116th Street, right by downtown. We went there and we were like, we are about to spend our last, $2 on buying a meal and buying something. And we just had this moment of like, that's a bit of the end. And we did have a credit card, but we had this moment, I think, where I think God worked in us, and it was like, don't plan on that. Like, don't go into we can just kind of keep adding to our debt. Let this kind of be the feeling that, you're at the end of your money. You need to rely on me now. And but it was a very big moment. I mean, every time we drive by it, even though we don't live in the state right now, we still think about it. It oddly enough is a quarter of a mile from our from the Formstack office that's there. So, fast forward many, many years, it ends up in our orbit a lot. It's a great reminder. But we kind of gave that to God, and very, very quickly, it was a day or two later, we quickly got, I think, a small gift from somebody that was unexpected, and they didn't really know our situation. And then we also, I got a call about a job that could, start pretty quickly. And so it was kind of one of those moments where, and at moments I wish I had felt a little closer, but it was one of those moments where it's like, okay, God will take care of us. He will take care of the lilies in the field and the birds of the air. And why would he not also take care of us? So
right there, that is so indolent. We've been unwise. We've gotten ourselves to this spot. Not we should repent and dig our way out. You doubled down on God loves us. He's going to take care of us. Am I saying that correctly?
I think that's exactly right. And that's a funny.
How do you pull that off?
Yes, I didn't have the prophet in my life to come give me some criticism of the way I was thinking at the time. So I appreciate that. But I think that's exactly right. I don't know. We blindly were like, I don't know. The Bible says it. We believe it. We'll rely on it. And we have seen God do that over and over again. Where I think if we stop thinking of ourselves as the provider of everything, if we stop thinking of ourselves as the path, we've got to make all the smart decisions. We've got to, not be stupid even. God cares about us, and he'll take care of us.
So I assume that in addition to inviting him to be the provider, did anything change for you about, I'm working with a client right now. We've recently written a chapter on Malachi math. And, it's test me in this. It's the only place really where we see the Lord inviting us to test him. And it's bring the full tithe. And the math on that's 23 1/3%. And see if I don't pour out such abundance that you can't contain it all. And so for this client, and his company, they've been giving 25% for 25 years, and they've grown 25x. So, he's the math looks like it works. But he talks about the Malachi math being about a heart posture. And so for him, the giving, and they decide what they're going to give every year based off of the anticipated earnings of the organization for the year. So they give it all in January. And then if they don't pedal hard enough, they end up giving, 35%. Did you find that there was something from that moment of pivot that was your side of the relationship to focus on?
Well, I actually think the tithing is a great start. We always, and maybe this was, maybe it was my this is the math equation that I think I'm going to rely on, which is I am tithing. And I would say we've been consistent about that almost, maybe our entire marriage.
And is that what that tithing?
Yeah, at least. Yeah, exactly.
Call it tithing or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, at least as a minimum, that's the standard. We're never thinking about that. We're thinking about is giving more than, but that's just this is part of something we're going to commit to because I think God has asked us to, or even if there's a bunch of nitpicky biblical details that you could argue about the tithe, let me just, even if it's a little too much, maybe it is, net versus gross or whatever. maybe it's too much, but I think for me, I've always had this, the stories in the Bible about leaving, people come through and they kind of get the harvest out of the field, but they're told like, leave the excess.
Yeah, the
So that
gleaner.
the poor and so I think for me, I've always just had this round up approach. Like, why would I get real specific and nitpicky about these things? Why don't I just assume God's going to bless me, assuming the best here, I guess is for lack of a better way to say it. And so we kind of I think we thought, we're tithing, that is our commitment, God will take care of us, and those things come together. Now, maybe in a worldly karma-esque way, we would have felt like if we weren't tithing, we should have been able to rely on this, principle. Maybe I made up that equation, but it's those two things, I think, went together. And I would even say later in our lives, once we got jobs, we continued to stupidly get in debt and too much of it. And we finally reached a point one day where we were like, this is a problem. And we got on the Dave Ramsey plan. And I think God changed our heart to, and getting out of debt is a really smart first choice. Like, keep tithing first, but get out of debt, because if you're in debt, you know what? Being in debt is like having investors in some ways. You don't get the freedom to make all the decisions you want. You can't just straight up say, oh, I own this house, I'm going to go sell it and go do something else. Or you have some bounds on you. It's the same thing for an investor. Like, even if it's been a good thing, you've got bounds that are kind of created by investment. And so all that to say, we got on the track to say, we need to pay off debt as fast as possible. Eventually that being our house too. And that for us created a lot of freedom over time as we continued to kind of commit to that. And we felt like God blessed that too. That as we got less focused on buying things that we did not really need, that put us in, a better position over time.
So all the way back then to the Wendy's moment and my challenge on the audacity of it, you had a claim because you were giving, you would have, I think, been able to say, we've been faithful. And so it wasn't like that the end of money was the consequence of unfaithfulness. It was, we have been imprudent in some areas, but we've been faithful. It's more imprudent on the places that were ours to make dumb choices with. The part that God has laid claim to, we've been faithful on. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think for each of us, we have different things that God calls us to be faithful around. I think for some people, it's money. For some people, it's relationships. For some people, it's the way they serve the poor. Like, I think God gives us each different values and skills to match those values to do good in the world. And I wouldn't say he doesn't care about every detail of our life, but it does seem like there are some focus areas that seem more important for each of us. And to your point way early in this conversation, you and I have different focuses. Like, mine is not better, yours is not better. They're just different. And we each are out on our own journey and doing hopefully good in the world in the way that God wants us to. And we're struggling with it too. How do we do it? Where are we failing?
Well, and that's, for the last couple of years, God's had me focused on the idea of testimony. And the recipe I have with testimony is God plus you plus his call on your world. And there's the variable of you is at least part of it. I think there's also his call is not as rote as the law. That's a starting point. But and so when you combine those things, testimony is just another word for presence. And so the reason I started thinking just now on the faithfulness is that when we're doing our part in terms of what he summoned us to do, I think we can make steadier eye contact with the people he puts us in front of. And when we are avoiding his mandates, we become avoidant people more broadly. And just as we were chatting before we hit record, I mentioned at Life Church, and the thing that I find maybe most compelling about Craig Groeschel is he works out, and his body bears witness to how he lives. And I find that really convincing. And it's, I mean, he's buff enough that maybe it's moved into vanity. I don't know. But what I find is that I assume that when a person is in a room with him, he does not have physical insecurities that get in the way of his being present with you. And a person in a business context who is being faithful with tithing and with their money can have a similar integrity in the moment. And so, if what I'm wanting to do with people is draw out their stories, I think it's critical for me to be focused on things like confession, repentance, and knowing where I'm just a turd. And by the way, there's plenty of debt there. So I guess I'm as you saw that moment and then started to get to respond with it, and then you're talking about stewarding at the company, I guess I see that there would be a way that you would make steadier eye contact in the business context because you had a steward mindset, but also because you had been humbled to a point that you needed to quit showing off, or quit owning in the same way.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like for me, I felt like at any given moment, if somebody wanted to make a decision that I was no longer the right person for the role, I needed to be fine with that. If I ran the business into the ground, I needed to be okay with that. If God wanted to bless it and make it, huge success, I needed to be okay with that. It was mine to steward. And so stewarding does mean making decisions that, for the good, for the long term. It means investing properly. It means making good practical choices in my world. And so it is about being a smart manager, being a smart leader. But at the same time, I'm doing this for someone else. I'm not doing this for myself. If I happen to get, good coming out of that, thank you. If I don't, it was never mine to begin with anyway. Like it needs to be, I always need to remember it was somebody else's. And so that also gives me the freedom to know that if somebody else says, get out of here, I'm okay. I'll move on. And this can be short term. This can be long term, because God's plan is much bigger than mine. And again, I need to be okay with that. I will say, as I've probably, and this is probably like a shift as private equity came into our business, probably as the assets have stacked up, even from a personal perspective. Although I voiced that, I'm still just a steward. I probably, the amounts got higher, the pressure got higher, and I think I probably, I guess, took more control, or I was still praying about it every day. I was still trying to seek God's best, but I think I probably, and maybe this is why I eventually part of why I eventually needed to leave. Just, it was not something, because the stewarding, even because the expectations were so high, it was hard for me to just be like, well, God's got to take care of this. That every day I woke up and I was like, gosh, there's so much stuff that has to get done to achieve these goals, to, hit these objectives. And I don't think I felt as much freedom to just say, all right, this is God's. And I'm, of course, going to keep making the best smart decisions. I think I got a lot more stuck in, I really have to make the right decision. So I'm going to take control here. And I'm not exactly sure how those decisions changed over time, but the pressure on myself definitely went up. And I think that was unnecessary at times. But I always kind of think, if you're the president of the United States, how do your job is constantly making decisions. And yet I do believe we have a God big enough that there is freedom to let him work, even if you have to make a lot of decisions.
As you were talking about the growth of that, it brought to mind Joseph in Potiphar's house. And so he can see what's coming. But then during the years of famine, as people have to sell everything to the king, and he's he's profoundly successful. There's a power dynamic where in a lot of ways Joseph is the kingmaker, and that stewardship, if he started measuring himself on a personal level as opposed to a results level, the moral challenge of leveraging destitution among the people, but then also, boy, that's a lot to give cleanly to the king, and I don't think everybody's wired for that, and it also makes sense to taste too much, and then there's the Peter principle, and if a person can identify their own Peter level and reset, there's probably some real joy in that. I want to shift to this last year after departing, choices, the depressurization. I want to talk about Nepal, and I also want to have you brag a bit about Dana. But one thing that comes to mind first is I have a friend who is considering, he's a senior executive at an organization that's in the process of selling. And his question to a group of friends was, how do you decide when to jump? And what was nuts to me and like super liberating is his entire mission is, I want to provide for my family as well as I can. And he's not asking his job to do anything for his soul. He doesn't need his job to provide particular meaning. And I heard that and like, man, my whole career has been this quixotic, what's the next windmill worth jousting at, and what's the next thing that matters enough. And the amount of tabs I've picked up for that kind of romantic approach, and that I've layered onto my family. When I'm overwhelmed and I'm a jerk, and my kids get yelled at for not cleaning up because I'm stressed about my not finishing a project, for example, or how that influences vacation times, or me taking we either can't afford it or I have my laptop with me when we go. I'm like, I've never made a leap based off of what is, I've taken my mission, my work, I've mingled those two things. And hearing my friend ask about it, like, how much freedom does he can just make the empirical choice and all of his missions at home. Where do you end up landing, and what's been your experience with that? Because you've done the church planning, and I hear you with this financial stewarding of somebody else's resource. I can't tell where your truest default is, and maybe it's blended. So where do you end up going?
Yeah, I think I am always in pursuit of work with the highest meaning, and so that's trying to discover mission and vision and let all that coming together with your values. It's something I would teach on a regular basis. You mentioned Nepal. What's one of the things I taught last week or 2 weeks ago was discovering your values so that you can effectively do the best work. And so I am always looking for that great confluence of a mission and your skill set and the timing and all that coming together into this is the greatest work. But I think as I've aged, what I've seen is I think we're all looking for heaven on earth. I think we're all seeking this like beautiful, whatever we think heaven is supposed to be. And we're trying to get as close to it as possible right here on the earth. Every decision we make, or at least every decision I make, is trying to get a little bit closer. And so, I try some things, it doesn't work. So try some more things. Oh, that works. I feel a little bit closer. But as I get a little bit older, I'm like, oh, we're never going to reach heaven on earth. There's always going to be a chasm. And I've actually taken more comfort in the past year, at least, thinking about almost like routine, appreciating repetitiveness, things that normally irritate me, by the way. We've been, actually for the past year, we have been in a church that has a kind of an 8:30 service, 8:30 liturgical service. Mm-hmm. And that has been an oddly delightful thing because it has the system works exactly the same every week. You're repeating a lot of things. They're working off the Anglican, I think, I can't remember what the calendar is, but that's where a lot of the messages come from, a lot of the words. And I think I've been in this point of, oh, maybe getting to mission, getting to purpose and everything is not as necessary as I'm always looking for. Can I just appreciate the mundane in some ways, and the routine? If I get up and I have my coffee every morning and I pray, and like that's delightful. And can I let that invade more of my life? So yeah, as I think about the wrestling moment, as I do think about the next thing, I'm absolutely focused on how do I find that perfect next thing that gets me to the next level, that I can experience the next great adventure, and it meets together with me and the things that I love and like and am good at. And so it's very, even as practical as I am, it's very hard I could never make a decision about like leaving my job just because it's like, oh, I have enough money now, see you later. That was fine. I'm always thinking I'm working for some higher purpose. And in that guy's case, it's his family, but mine is probably naturally more externally focused, I suppose. And so I'd struggle with that. Yet I appreciate there are people that I think, again, are doing God's will and make decisions much more practically and more just, oh, yep, I've reached the age of retirement. It's time to be done.
Well, and maybe it's to the point of the getting older and that homesickness awareness. I think 10 years ago, if I had heard his perspective, I would have thought it was inferior. And all I thought as he talked was, wow, does that sound good? And I don't feel superior for being wired differently at all. In fact, I have a certain level of lament that I'm stuck the way I am. Like, I'm going to be this way and I need the things to work, but I'm always going to pursue the thing that lights me up inside first. And that's the scar tissue. That's the scars and the source of counseling that my family gets to have from me.
Well, but you know what? I heard something great recently, and I was like, you know what? I don't appreciate this as much as I should. My mother told me she, she's in her 70s, and she was, I don't know why we were talking about purpose and work or something like that. And she was like, the world also needs worker bees. And she said, I am a worker bee. I want somebody to tell me what needs to get done, and I am glad to work on it. And then I am done. I don't need, this. I don't want to lead. I don't want to be, part of leading. I want other people to make those decisions. And I was like, you know what? I think I've also, not only for myself, called myself to like, oh, it's got to be about purpose and big things. But I call everybody to that. At Formstack, I used to make everybody develop their own, we called it a why statement, but a purpose statement. And I think that can still be good, even if you're the worker bee. Like, I think that can be, you can develop one that's just about, I love to get good work done and support people or whatever. But I also potentially was artificially creating strain on people that was unnecessary for them to think about.
Yep. I totally see that. And I'm finding that in the work that I'm doing, I think about David's mighty men, the warriors, the Gibberim, who are listening for the king to whisper something, longing for the waters, and they'll go fight and get it. And I think about, I don't intend to ever have a $5 billion cap table for my business. But if I continue to serve the people I'm serving, what if I influenced $5 billion worth of business in the world? And it's the same way. The financial advisor can either give 10% of his income, or he can teach generosity, and the net impact of that is multitudinous. So no, I get it. And the joy I find in finding people worth serving aggressively is worker bee. It's like, here's my niche. My job's to amplify those folks. And so I kudos to your mom, because to use such a diminutive term as worker bee is especially like I'm talking. I'm going to be a servant, but I'm going to be a mighty man. I'm going to be a warrior for the king, and I'm going to go influence $5 billion. Like that's not worker bee. That's caveated ego, I suppose. But it feels again the cards have dealt. So moving forward, then. So now that you've made the choice, and you've made the choice from a blended place, clearly, to depart, and when I've spoken with people in situations similar to where you're at, and I before we started the recording again, I referenced some old like NYPD or some episode like that, and I think there's also a Mel Gibson movie where his wife is pinned against a tree by a car, and then they pull the car away, and the pressure kills her. In the NYPD, it's a man who's trapped between a train and the platform. And they know that once they pull the train away, the artificial pressure that has him pinned is going to release and he's going to die. When I brought that up before we talked, you talked about the importance of work. And so I'd like you to go with that now. So it's work, and whether it's fear-driven, artificial, whatever, but you talked about work mattering. Would you delve into that some more?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I appreciated, Tim Keller talks about this. Lots of people have talked about it, but it is this idea that work was actually created. Oh, it turns out the Bible started the conversation, which is what they were talking about.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah, but work started before the fall. It started day one. Now, looks like it turned out it got a little harder. Plowing up your field, I guess, got harder after sin came about, but work was always there. And turns out like God worked to create the world. Like I don't know exactly how he did it, and maybe it's a quick push of a button or whatever, but like it happened, and it was a form of work. So much that he took a break from it after on the 7th day. So I think because of that, and I think about these like equations in life, I do have the sense that work is important for us to be doing. If we're not doing it, there's a chance, and that is not like breaks are very important, but there's no question about that. It's not a work all the time thought process at all, but just are we working in life, or are we on break? I suppose. I think when you're not working, there's maybe something not quite materializing in your life that needs to be. Maybe you're not in front of the right people, or using the right energy, or getting stuck in situations that force you to call on God, seek his help. I think there's something about that formula that seems important. And I am in one of those life moments where, I suppose the car is backed off and the pressure is off. And I'm a little, for a couple months, I intentionally tried to do nothing. Then I ended up playing Fortnite a lot. So I was mostly just distracting myself. My kids were home for the summer, so that was good. And that was probably the last summer we'll all have together. So that was a positive thing. But I'm now in this odd moment of I don't have like a defined moment. You've got to be back to work by this time. I could artificially create that line, but I know it's artificial. So what difference is that going to make? That won't motivate me. But I also know. So I'm in this like struggle because I love that idealism. A friend of mine and I were talking recently, and we were talking about some politics of the past, handful of years. And I mentioned a belief I had, and he was like, "Boy, if you believed that, you're an idealist." And I was like, "I guess I am. I guess I believe maybe in the best in people, and that." I don't know, that all good things can happen. So that idealist in me also says we can find our perfect mission, vision, work. So I've got that over here. And then as I'm thinking about going back to work in some way, I've got to find that. And yet I'm not sure I'm going to find that until I'm just in the middle of something and back and committed to something. And I'll discover it within that process, because I almost think work is necessary for us to work out and discover our purpose, our life. Otherwise, I think we'll just think about it all day long, and that idealism won't ever be achieved. So then we won't do anything. We're like, this doesn't fit all of my perfect parameters. So I'm just going to sit here and wait until that happens. And that's the struggle I'm in right now. So it's this like bouncing back and forth between God, show me what I need to do, and I'll do it. But I would love for God to just like send me an assignment via email so I could just know what it is and get going. Yeah.
So I remember the day I received my first copy of my first book, and the only professional brass ring I ever had was author. And it turns out that box got checked self-publishing, and then later, I paid to associate with another author, ended up with manager and multi-book deal, all that sort of stuff. But the only threshold that really scratched an itch for me was the day that I got, there's my name on that book. I'm an author. And it was a really disorienting moment because first off, I'm like, that was a really stupidly low bar because now what? But it was also a really easily earned, from now on, I get to live and work from gift. I have nothing else I need to prove in a way that feels personally demonstrative. From here, there's work I want to do and be invited into, but from here, I get to offer gifts. And I wonder to what extent you've had that threshold as well. And like from here, proving the same thing again is going to be boring. And so going down a serial route probably isn't going to scratch the itch at all. You talk about who you were with in Nepal, how you first connected, because I think this is the fellow that I've been hearing about for years. And I think that I'm curious about what it's like working with him now compared to what it was when you had you were in your own battle. So I wonder if there's a gift posture that's emerging here too. So tell me about him.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great place. I think I'm trying to begin to understand, because I do think, all right now I've got time to give my time away for free, or for low financial return, low to none. So I'm doing that with my university. I'm doing that and then now I'm doing that with this guy in Nepal. And so the quick backstory there is a friend of mine that we've referred to a number of times here, but doesn't like his name used publicly. So we respect him and we love him.
I'm on film a couple of days ago. With Eddie's movie.
But we love and respect him, so we try to keep his name out of the we don't say it too loud. But he took me to Nepal for the first time to see some of the sports ministry that he is a part of. And I got to meet a guy when I was there who had a software company. And so that was pretty interesting. I was like, I'm two things came together. One is I got to visit a software company, and one of their purposes was about helping Nepalis find great jobs and keep them in the country. Because most of the time when they graduate from high school or even college, they have to leave the country to get good enough jobs to pay the bills. And so huge brain drain. And so I kind of saw that. Then I got introduced to this other guy that had a outsourced software development company. And so we started a relationship and started talking, and we would just catch up over every once in a while over the past 10 years. And I ended up being an advisor to his business, which just meant a little bit more time spent. And then all of a sudden, when I had my time available this past kind of 9 months, he asked for a little bit more help. And I was like, all right, what could we do here? And so what's really interesting is, as a CEO, one of the things I often thought was it'd be great to be able to hire teams elsewhere in the world. And some of that's, of course, cost associated. Some of that's like this purpose of helping people find better jobs in their home country. Think about the off conversation of our southern border here in the United States. If people could find great work in their home country, I'm pretty sure they would like to stay. And so if you can solve those root problems, maybe you're doing something, good. And so we've basically been over the past couple of months on a journey of really helping him figure out how to tell his story in kind of the Western world, and really closing some of the gaps that you have when you're working with people across the world. And that's time zone gaps, that's culture gaps, that's language gaps. Even if they speak English, you're speaking slightly different English. And if we could close some of those gaps with a bit of a partnership here in the US, maybe we could create really a great business that could grow and thrive. Kind of sparked here, say in the US, but helps him grow his business and continue to be the service delivery, in Nepal. And so I went to, my wife Dana and I went to Nepal a handful of weeks ago, and actually got to participate in a number of cool things. We got to kind of speak to a couple ministry audiences and talk about leadership. And, of course, that's from our Western viewpoint. And we brought some of that. We got to talk to the business that my friend John has and begin to tell them a story about how we think we can kind of grow over time and get them introduced to kind of a Western audience, a North American audience. And so, right now I'm just on a bit of an adventure of trying to figure out what is it to, give back in a lot of ways, use some of almost everything I'm doing right now is the easiest possible thing. I don't have to think hard. It's like things that I just know these things have to happen to be successful in having your presence in the US and beginning to sell in the US. And so it's this nice moment where I'm putting energy in. I think it's very helpful. I hope it's very helpful. But I also am not having to, like I was at Formstack, just be stuck in these, oh man, how do we grow to the next level? What's the new go-to-market plan that we need to develop? What's the new product that we need to try to introduce? Those are really complicated. In a nice way, this is a little bit easier to say, hey, just go run down this track, and that's going to get us started, to grow. And so that's the adventure I'm on right now. I don't know, who knows where it goes from here. We're about to kind of launch the business in the US. And yet it's also like this, at the end of the day, I'm really just trying to help him get successful. If I can kind of lob that off in some way and let him go run and I just help level some things up, that'd be wonderful. That might be the best possible outcome, in fact, to really help in that way.
So the phrase that I was thinking of Eric Liddell saying, when I run, I feel God's pleasure, while you were talking. What are you finding as you're helping John that, wow, God likes it when I do this. And I wonder, as you're in this sorting, and if it's similar to the whole, now I get to live as gift thing, what's the gift or the running where you notice as you're doing these things, God really enjoys doing this with me?
That is, I'm such a practical person. I struggle.
Weirdos like me to ask you that question. But
I think it's a great question though. I'm trying to find more acceptance in something that I think is going well. And I think it's a form of seeing God create the space for this to kind of play out and be good. And when I do it, I think it feels good, which is, it's really just sharing advice, thoughts, experience that I've had. It's not terribly new and innovative. But it is new and innovative for the person I'm talking to.
Sure.
They haven't thought about it, or they're at a new stage of growth and they're running into these challenges. And so I think it's a form of, coaching, mentoring, where I just kind of get to show up and just be there. I don't have to prepare really, because I'm for the most part just pulling from my history and knowledge and the things that I've learned over time. And that does feel very good, because I think after 14 years, specifically in that, in Formstack, of every day felt like I've got to come up with the next new innovation. I've got to, even if things are going well, I know we've got to prepare for the moment that's not going well. This is a nicer, okay, I can just be myself. And I'm pretty relational by nature, so it's nice for me to just be able to sit down with somebody, listen, talk, move on, I haven't created too many responsibilities for myself. Hopefully I've lifted them a little bit. But that's a tough, oh, go ahead.
No, what I think I'm hearing is that you're experiencing the joy of being valued for who you've become. And so like, I hate when a person says, well, if you're in the NBA and somebody says, wow, you're tall, like, yeah, it's useful for the thing I do, you know? And if somebody tells me you're a good writer, I'm like, I hear two things. One is, yeah, it's useful for the thing I do, but the fact that you noticed it probably means I was doing something to draw attention to myself instead of what the writing was supposed to point to. And so, but I'm imagining that for right now, you're showing up tall and you're showing up with a skill set, but it's a thing that you've earned and become. So when you walk in, you're fully equipped for that thing. What a lovely thing for your gift to be your presence.
I mean, yeah, I think that's true. And funny enough, I find myself in environments where people have not just been introduced to things that I've been introduced to, and not gotten to see some of the story I've been able to be a part of. And so it is, yeah, I think that does create a sense of value. And I will say too, like sometimes when we're valued for our art, or people say something about it, then we get a little like, well, no, that's no good. I don't like the way you, yeah, you didn't see it how I wanted you to see it, or whatever. I always think about a pastor who every single weekend they get up and they preach, and, they're just planting seeds and they hope people are listening. But most of the time they have no clue. I mean, truly, how would you have a clue how people are really responding? Of course, handful of people write in, some angrily, some happily. And you ignore both to a certain degree. If you kind of have to ignore one a little bit, and you end up ignoring all. But it's one challenge as I get into this, just like my words and my history and my knowledge are helpful. I struggle with am I doing any good? Like they're nodding, they're saying, I appreciate you, I appreciate this, but how do I really know that's the case? But funny enough, like you mentioned Dana, she, one of the things I would tell you about her is she is a much, much better leader than she is. So much clearer with people. She is more empathetic. She can take very difficult situations. I mean, a great example was when she had her first kind of real employee issue, she really worked through it and figured out, how do I grow this person? How do I give them the appropriate feedback to go to the next level? And then how do I do it slowly enough that they can actually achieve? Whereas I'm like, oh, this is not working out, I'm going to have to fire this person. And I even if I'll try a little bit, but then quickly I'm just like, I can't deal with this. And so, for her, over many years, she's turned that into really trying to help women specifically gain confidence, grow, become, make smarter decisions. But along the way, she has been an immense help to me. Absolutely my best coach along the way. I had many paid coaches, but she has listened to more, coached through more, encouraged me. And I would have totally failed at my job if I didn't have her throughout the process, kind of running alongside with me.
So yeah, I saw the pictures of her in Africa, and boy, did she look happy. Talk to me about what she's doing, and we'll end on that. I mean, I want to bridge from what she's doing to the idea that you're another couple where I think you both show up best when you show up together. Because she's a force, and she's way more awake than most people. And even this whole, she studied it and then she's going to go slow. So even when she's going slow, she's doing it on purpose. And there's where, I'm like, boy, I don't know if I'm awake enough for her to see me all the way, but I feel way more comfortable showing up kind of dopey with you, because you bring a different balance. And so together, that's great. And I think Christine and I show up in a complementary fashion as well. So what is Dana doing now? And then what was it like to show up in Nepal? And to what extent do you think that's God's invitation to this next season for you guys?
Dana is one, she's a coach. So she's, it's the day-to-day business that she runs, which is really helping women. And she decided to focus specifically on women, specifically on Christian working women, because they tend to be in maybe the most challenged position because, as a Christian woman, you already have these, even if you are a part of a church that is fairly open to women in leadership, there's a lot of messages that are kind of like, be behind the scenes, be supportive, don't be as out there and in front of people. And so even if you're not working in a Christian environment, that still colors your, starting point. And so she's really trying to help people work out of that and become the best leaders that they can possibly become, and lead people in new ways, make decisions that aren't just about their family, but about themselves. And so that's kind of the day-to-day business. And then one of the important things for her has been, how do I, literally give back from my business? And so the way she's done that is through a group called Rise Up International. And so they're out teaching women often in rural villages in African countries. Kenya was where she went real recently. Just teaching them leadership skills, almost the same thing, but in a more formal training kind of way. What does the Bible say? How did God value women? How did women do great things in the Bible? And how can you kind of in your community be a leader and not just a follower, where God's called you to do that? And so she's really, she loved doing that. And it was kind of a new experience for her, but a great one. And so it was interesting. I kind of sent her an email while she was in Kenya, and I was like, "Hey, I know you're already gone. You're probably already feeling the jet lag and the pretty hard work. And how would you like to go to Nepal in 3 weeks?" And so we hatched that plan, and like I said, we had a couple opportunities kind of unexpected opportunities to teach together, because actually the intent was for her to do the teaching. That was kind of what the request was. And then as we were talking, it was like, oh man, 8 straight hours of teaching all on your own is a lot. So I was just like, hey, I'll step in and I'll do some with you. And I would say it was some of the best experience of the trip. Just being able to, one, it's something I don't do very much. I always had to speak at Formstack, but it was more like, what's the vision? What are the big 3 objectives? Things like that. This was more just, again, teaching from a little bit of the reservoir of knowledge. And then she was doing the same. And, she was able to bring, actually, one of the most beautiful things I thought happened was she brought the idea of Sabbath kind of to the forefront, and not just Sabbath, like take a day off, but sabbatical. And you can't be in ministry your entire life and not take some time away. I mean, Jesus took time away, and that was new for people. They were kind of like, nope, I'm the senior pastor. I have to be at every wedding, every funeral, every baptism, and on call 24 hours a day. And so, I'll contrast 2 moments though. One beautiful thing happened. She's a deacon at a church in kind of one of the cities in Nepal that we went to visit. She came up to us. She didn't speak English, but she'd been translated to all day. And she came up and, kind of wouldn't quite prophecy about the future, but a bit of, prophecy over us. And she was just like, I can see the way you two work together and love each other. And she just spent like 5 minutes kind of giving this amazing feedback about just observing us for half a day. And the way we work together and the way we seem to enjoy each other. And that is very, very true of our relationship. And I think we're at a point where I would really, I even said to her yesterday, like, I really don't want to do the next thing until we've explored the real possibility of what can we do together. And maybe that's not God's plan for right now, for whatever reason, but I'd sure like to make sure we work that out before we go on and do things that, of course, will be supportive of each other, but if we're on different tracks, they're different tracks, and we don't get to, it's not quite, quite the same. And so we'd love to see that come together. I'm not sure what that might look like yet. And so we'll see where that goes.
That's cool. Talk about an exit worth exiting into. So I'm going to send you an email asking for some favorite books and suggestions. I would like to get John's URL to put in this as well, put it in the notes and then also Dana's stuff. Thank you very much for the time today. And I'm looking forward to checking in and continuing to pray for this season. This is really a well-earned and lovely spot that you're in. And thanks for taking some time with it today.
Absolutely, Pete. Great conversation. And from day one, it's always been a thoughtful, fun, adventurous conversation when we get stuck.
Great. All right.